Hello friends, welcome to Black Tower Storycraft. I am your host, Danielson, and my, what a terrifying selection of stories we have for you tonight. Volume 1 of Scary Werewolf Stories, which I released 2 years ago, has proven so popular that naturally it is time for a Volume 2. And so I have been busily at work in the castle, finding another batch of stories to share with you. I certainly hope you enjoy these stories, friends. Make sure to like and share the video with your friends, or like and share by yourself, especially if you, like the werewolves in these stories, find yourself curiously alone. Beware of the moon, friends. Up first, we have Dragon Pants. I killed a werewolf, and now I can't get enough. I had always wanted to be an actor, specifically in an action movie. I know, it's a super hard job to get. My parents told me that all the time, in fact. But seriously, just the idea of seeing myself being in a badass film, being badass at that, fighting like 10 guys at once, I thought that would be the coolest thing I would ever feel. That dream died the moment I killed my first werewolf. It was a couple of months ago. I had just gotten laid off because of Corona, so I was of course stuck at my parents' house. I had been having bad dreams every single time I closed my fucking eyes. The most recent one, though, was so vivid I swear it was real. I was in a forest, running from something. I didn't know what it was, but it terrified me. As I ran, I saw my reflection. I was some little girl. I should have been looking at the ground because I suddenly tripped on a huge root and landed face first in the mud. And that's when it caught me. I felt a sharp pain in my neck, and then I woke up. I was seriously debating using the little money I had left to hire a therapist when I walked into the living room to see the exact same little girl I saw in my reflection on the TV. According to the news, she had gone missing last night. I'm not a hero, but when I saw that, it was like some sort of paternal instinct inside me forced me to try my best to help. Plus, I had nothing better to do. So I stole my dad's hunting rifle, drove to the nearest forest, and just began walking. I felt like I knew where to go, I suppose because of the dreams, but at the time it felt like I was just following my instincts. I swear it took me less than 10 minutes to find her. She was sitting against a tree, crying. I walked up to her, but she completely ignored me until I touched her arm. She looked up at me and just stared. She was super creepy. It was like there was nothing going on in her mind at all. That's when I heard an ear-wrenching screech coming from behind me. It was a werewolf, but not how you would probably expect one to look. It looked like something that would crawl out of a sewer, not something that had fur and mannish features. It did have human skin and visible bones bulging out from under it. Its snout had human teeth and only tiny holes on the side of its head for ears. Instead of eyes, though, it had a grotesque lump of skin on its face. It snarled and bounded toward me. It had been at least 100 feet away when I'd first seen it, but by the time I could even react, it was in my face. Its rubbery skin rippled, and those gigantic claws emerged from its fingers. And by emerged, I mean they stabbed straight through the flesh. Panicked, I closed my eyes and squeezed my hands together when bang! The fact the werewolf was running away registered way after the pain of shooting my foot. I'm not proud of saying it, but I gave up on the kid and limped away as fast as I could. Adrenaline is shit, but when your foot is bleeding like a broken pipe, you are not going far. I decided to hide in the bushes, because why wouldn't I hide where something that obviously hunts by smell could easily find me? Surprisingly though, it was the little girl who found me. This time, she looked like she actually had a soul. She sat down next to me and once again began crying. This time it wasn't a small whimper, it was all out bawling, so obviously the creature had found us. So I shot it. I had already been mentally prepared. It went limp. It convulsed on the ground a bit, but I watched it die. Well, obviously it wasn't bulletproof. At that point, I was super hazy from the loss of blood, but even my weak brain could register that I was lost in the woods with werewolves. The first thing I did was bind my wound. Next, I looked for landmarks. There was absolutely nothing though. Finally, I looked for a tree I could climb to get better vantage. When I found it, I told the kid to look for berries. I didn't actually expect to be lost, but I had to keep her busy so she wouldn't start crying again and break my concentration. When I climbed the tree, I saw my town right on the horizon. Must have been at least a couple 100 miles away. And that's when I heard the same damned screech. I took the rifle off my back and looked down to see the creature had cornered the child against some rocks. The same instinct that had told me to save her told me to just watch her die. And I listened. That's when I saw the kid's skin ripple and she turned into another one of those werewolves. No wonder she never talked. They immediately started fighting, but since the one I had shot was already hurt, I watched the kid tear into its neck. Now, it was definitely dead. I aimed my rifle at the other one and took a shot. I missed, but hey, at least I grazed her leg. Werewolves are fast, but anything can trip. But she did trip on a root, and taking the opportunity, I aimed and fired. This time it was a direct hit in her neck. I knew she was dead, just like the other, and that's when I blacked out. The next thing I knew, I woke up in a hospital. I'm not going to go into details about my injuries, nobody wants to hear that. But they thought I had been mauled by a bear, which is weird, since I don't remember either of them actually attacking me at all. Even weirder, they didn't find any werewolf corpses. Guess they weren't as dead as I thought they were. Anyway, I have a job now. Believe it or not, I'm a monster hunter. It's way easier to get signed up in one of those agencies than you'd think. They give you information about the monsters and free weapons. I have to find my own contracts, though. A friend suggested I look for contracts here, since this subreddit is for people's experiences with monsters. If anyone does have a job for me, please, I'll hunt anything. I need money, but more importantly, I just need the rush of killing again. Excellent story to get our toes wet, friends. And now to more serious fare. Questionnaire 513's The Wichita Werewolf. Growing up here, I was always greeted by friendly people. Everyone said hi and waved to each other. You had your neighbors over on Sunday after church for a barbecue, and everyone had a good time. Of course, being a kid, I was very curious and would explore while my parents were visiting with people from the church. One afternoon, while my friends and I played hide and seek, I had the bright idea to sneak down to the southern part of my neighborhood, which was much more run down. The farther and farther I got away from the house, the darker the road seemed to become. I suppose it was due to the foliage above blocking out the sun. The paved street turned to a dirt road. White picket fences turned into overgrown yards without fences and abandoned houses. I found a hiding spot under an old pickup truck with weeds growing through the bed and cab. I was invisible then to the naked eye. About 10 minutes passed, and I could barely make out the conversations and laughter several houses down at the barbecue, as well as the screaming and commotion whenever one of my friends was found. Behind me, I heard a stick break, but I didn't dare look. It was probably my friend Clay trying to find me. Suddenly, 2 denim legs appeared in front of my face, barefoot but far hairier than to be any of my friends. I kept quiet. As the knees bent, I was met with an older man. He had 2 different colored eyes.
"What in the Sam Hill are you doing down there?"
I'm hiding from my friends," I managed to reply. I crawled out from under the truck and realized I had never seen this man ever before in the neighborhood. I was taught at a very young age to have exceptional manners, and so I introduced myself. The old man asked me if I wanted to come back to his house, enticing me with his recipe of homemade cornbread. Again, I retained my manners and kindly refused. Instead of being persistent, the old man nodded and told me to go play with my friends. But by this time, Clay had seen me and started to head over. I walked toward him while motioning the timeout signal.
"Why aren't you hiding?"
he exclaimed. I told Clay how I was hiding, until some man found me, and I pointed back, but the man was gone, nowhere to be found. As Clay was pestering me, claiming I'd stopped the game because I couldn't find a good hiding spot, I was staring at the old truck where I'd been hiding. The grass and weeds were much too thick that even standing here glaring at where I'd been, I wouldn't have been able to see myself. How did that man ever manage to see me? I finally convinced Clay what had happened was true, but Ryan and Jacob, even Bo, didn't seem to believe me, or really care too much. Clay and I saw that man again, but this time he was walking down the dirt road on the south side of the neighborhood and walked into one of the houses we had always assumed was vacant. Naturally, we had to investigate. The big cottonwood outside the house had squirrel bones stuck to the trunk, as well as a reflective light like you'd find on a bicycle nailed to either side. The man's house had a ripped screen door, as well as 2 monstrous moths that crawled the wall by the cracked window.
"I can't believe he lives here,"
Clay whispered.
"Where did he come from anyway?"
We turned around, facing the dirt road. It was no outlet, and at the end there was a fence that read, "No trespassing." Of course, 2 kids, we trespassed. As we climbed over the fence, a chill ran down my spine, dread filling my being, but I didn't want to seem like a wuss to Clay, so I managed to keep up and keep my composure. Through the trees and thickets, we found a tattered old house that looked like it had been hit by a tornado years before. Next to it was an old shed with a broken-out window, and on the ground around it looked like blood. It could have been spray paint, but also it could have been blood. From an animal? Back farther was the railroad tracks, and past that the other side of town, so we decided to go back to Clay's house. I could tell Clay also wanted to leave as much as I did. Fall swept in, bringing with it the sweet aroma of dead leaves and crisp morning air. It was still warm, but much more bearable than it had been in summer. School had started, so playing with my neighborhood friends became something of a rarity, only hanging out on weekends or on the playground, or if we finished our homework at night. We had always enjoyed catching lightning bugs or playing in the treehouse at night during the spring and summer. But this particular fall, all of our parents would usually limit how often we went out and over to each other's houses. Though you may not know, the Southern Plains area of the United States is notorious for human trafficking. But the autumn of 2004 was something else entirely. It all started when a kid from the West Side went missing. The police simply thought the kid had gotten lost, but when they started their investigation, the trail went cold. The next week, a Baptist church down a couple of blocks away from our road was having a fundraiser. 2 children from there also went missing. We believed there had to be some sort of connection. At night, I could swear I heard some sort of howling, followed by all the dogs in my neighborhood barking like crazy. My father dismissed it, telling me I was hearing coyotes and that there was no wolves in Kansas. But I knew what coyotes sounded like, and we often encountered them while hunting. These did not sound like the calls of coyotes. I suppose parents do their best to keep children from finding out how terrible the world is, and that was their futile attempt on the night of October 23rd. I was playing at Clay's house, along with my friends Ryan and Bo. He had quite the collection of toys, both new and hand-me-downs from his older brother. At around 9 p.m., Clay's parents got a call, and we heard footsteps coming toward the top of the stairs. Which one of our parents wanted us home? Who was the first to go?
Jacob, your father wants you to come home now,
proclaimed Clay's mom. We all froze and exchanged glances, making sure we didn't miss Jacob, as if he thought he'd been under our noses the entire time.
What?
Hollered Clay.
Apparently he has a test tomorrow morning,
answered Clay's dad. My stomach sank. Us 4 boys met Clay's mom at the stairs.
Jacob never came over. Jacob isn't here,
we all said. Clay's mom gave us a stern look of disapproval, thinking we were pranking her, but before long her face gave way to a horrific grimace. She picked the phone up off the hook, dialing Jacob's parents. Through the phone down the stairs, I could still hear the petrified voice of Jacob's mom. Police asked us questions, if Jacob had told us about any people he'd recently met, the last time any of us had spoken to him, etc. They asked if we had seen him doing anything strange recently, to which we had all seen the strange man, so we told the investigators about him.
Well, even if we knew where he lived, we don't know if he is the one behind this.
Clay and I told the officer about what house he was living in.
Son, no one lives in that house. No one has for years. It's abandoned,
the officer said, looking at Clay. The investigator told our parents that they'd keep an eye out for the man who matched our description. The cops didn't seem to genuinely care about that, though, so I suppose it was a good thing Clay and I didn't mention anything else, like the creepy shed. Plus, we weren't supposed to be back there in the first place. Halloween rolled around, a time to pretend spookiness and celebrate with candy. Instead, it was filled with absolute terrified families and mourning parents. Across the town, more kids hadn't returned from trick-or-treating. The investigation was stepped up, and the police had suspects, but one after the other, they were all cleared. Hunting season had taken my mind off the recent tragedy, though. It was hard to tell, but my father was quite uneasy about this whole ordeal. It was almost like he was taking me out into the wilderness to keep me safe. We'd go hunting quite a bit, me and him. One night, my father and I were headed back home, and in the rearview mirror, I saw a beautiful sunset, the pond mirroring it, and the branches blowing in the stiff breeze. Maybe this whole thing would just pass over, I thought, still missing Jacob. When I got home, I saw police lights flickering and the cops outside of Clay's house.
No!
I cried aloud. My father and mother embraced me as Clay's parents embraced each other, empty inside. It's been 15 years since that fall, and this all still remains a mystery. My son is turning into a werewolf by exicium elements. I love James more than life itself. I remember the day I gave birth to him. I looked at that little bundle of human life in my arms with pure joy. He was beautiful, with hazel brown eyes, just like his late father, who, due to a thyroid disorder, passed away before he was born. We got along well, just the two of us. Outside of my job, I nearly spent all of my time with little James and rarely needed to entrust him to a babysitter. When he was 6, he expressed an interest in the piano when he saw the great balls of fire on TV one evening. We bought a baby grand within a month, even though it was financially a bit difficult, and had a music teacher come over once a week. But James was a fast learner, and I could envision him playing at concert halls as an adult. At school, he was no different. He was a smart, well-behaved boy all through elementary school. At parent-teacher conferences, his teachers were sure to tell me what wonderful manners he had and how he was always sure to raise his hand before speaking. He was a pleasure compared to the other more rambunctious kids, they would tell me. He wasn't your typical dirt-ridden little boy either. He was practically Victorian in how prim and proper he acted. Never would there be grass stains found on his knees. Never would he have to be told to take off his shoes before entering the house. He kept the area around himself clean as could be. That is, until recently. Ever since he started junior high, I noticed he's become messy. His hair, that is now kept longer, nearly shoulder length, is disheveled, and his clothes often have holes in them. About a month ago, I politely reminded him he was due for a haircut. The only response I received was a grunt. I looked a little closer at him and realized a shave might be in order as well. At dinner, he ate his food in a hurry, often chewing or gorging with his mouth open. And let me tell you, he eats a lot now. Sometimes he requests 3rd helpings of pasta and bread. When he made these requests, his mouth was always open, full of food. His manners had nearly fully dissolved. When I was doing laundry, I had to use a spot cleaner on his clothes for various stains I found. This had never been needed before, but constituted another eroded trait found in my previously spotless boy. On top of that, he asked me to cancel his piano lessons, and he now refuses to play anymore. The baby grand sits here unloved, unplayed, and unappreciated. Soon his temperament became apparent, even to his teachers. He brought home a teacher's note that I had to sign. He had received detention for cursing at his history teacher. F-word, in case you were wondering. James tried to assure me it wasn't a big deal, but some kind of punishment had to be doled out. I settled on grounding him for a month and hoped that might set him straight, but that's when he really did it. A few days after this, I woke up in the middle of the night and noticed his bedroom door slightly ajar. I looked inside, and his bed appeared spaciously flat. Out of anger at what I suspected, I ripped the blankets off the bed and confirmed that he was gone. It was past midnight, and his curfew was a solid 9 p.m., not to mention he was grounded. I didn't want to disturb anyone at such an hour, but I had to find out where he was and thought to call a few of his friends. As I picked up the phone, I heard a car door slam. I went to the front door to see him walking up the driveway. Before he had a chance to enter, I swung open the door and grasped at him under the patio light. What I saw was not what any mother would expect from a 13-year-old boy. His face was nearly completely covered in thick hair, other than a small area around his eyes. I was speechless for a moment while I stared at him. I looked past him and toward the car that dropped him off and saw a girl at the steering wheel driving off.
James, what?
I started.
Nothing, Mom. Jesus. I was just out with a friend.
He responded as though everything was perfectly natural. He pushed past me. Before he could get to his room, I grabbed his arm, only to immediately let it go in horror. What I felt beneath my palm was an unnatural coarseness. His arm was covered in hair. No, this was not hair. This was fur. I looked closer at his torso, and I realized his shirt was torn at the neck seam. My eyes moved further down, and my heart nearly stopped when I spotted what looked like a small stain of blood on his jeans. He shoved my arm away with his hand, and I let out a shriek when one of his long nails scratched my arm.
Ow, James, you clawed me. What's happened to you? Will you leave me alone?
He shouted while slamming his bedroom door shut. I stood outside the door for a moment, but I was too scared to open it. Besides, I knew what I had to do. Teenage boys with this condition would only become more out of control as they developed into men. So I went to the kitchen and grabbed a knife. I'm now in my bedroom with my butcher knife on my lap. I know what you are thinking. You're thinking I raised him wrong, but I raised a nice, good boy. What he has is a disorder. The disorder is lycanism, and count yourself lucky if you've never experienced it firsthand. He's nearly a full werewolf now, and I only know one tried and true way to cure it. The darkness did increase with that story, friends. One of the darker moments in this video, and certainly one of the darker moments on this channel. This is Black Tower Storycraft after all. Up next, friends, is our final story for the evening by Forest 1333. A werewolf saved me. Do I hope to think that one might even save you? It's not in the nature of werewolves to save people. Certainly not in the nature of vampires, least of all with women. Our group was assembled in a matter of minutes and instructed. We were to work on defeat 20 objects, not to be surprised, and not to take prisoner. The Olympics 80 was approaching, and the rapid response teams were regularly completing tasks. It was one of them. After a short briefing, many questions remained. We will land on the secret scientific base of a certain research institute where something went wrong according to plan. It is not known how the objects are armed, but it is known that they are very dangerous because they are not human. A military board landed us in the middle of the taiga next to a one-story building, and we took a position. The alleged opponent did not show himself, and we did not know how he could show himself. We approached the building and entered through a broken window. The windows were all exposed. The doors were safe and sound, and some were still locked. Inside, all of the equipment was shattered. In one of the rooms, the savagely dismembered remains of 2 scientists were discovered. From the ceiling where the broken light bulb hung on the wire, hung also intricately connected entrails, like villains dancing with them, and then threw them on the lamp, sweeping the wire over them. One of us, from what he saw, was bad. I still do not have the right to disclose the names of participants in the operation, even though the guys deserve to be known. We were all hard-boiled, perhaps me more than the others, but still, this should have been a Nancy-free operation. I will conditionally call him Second. We dragged the Second into the corridor, waited for him to bounce back, and began to walk around the perimeter of the building. In 2 more locked rooms, brutally dismembered corpses of scientists were discovered. The tracks managed to approximately restore the order of events that occurred. In some of the rooms were cells. Apparently, it contained experimental material. It is not known how, but the prisoners managed to get out of control. Instead of hiding in the taiga, they staged an exemplary execution. They broke into the rooms through the windows and took out all the hatred on the people. To leave on the trail of the destroyers was late in time. It was already getting dark. We decided to start the search in the morning, but for now, we were setting up camp in the attic of the laboratory. Found a ladder and climbed there. Putting the guard at both the dormer windows, we prepared for the night, what promised to be a long night. As soon as the forest plunged into twilight and then darkness, the hoarse howl, as much as a wolf, as much as a man's, rang out very near. From the depths of the forest, the same voices answered him, or at least those similar, but I did not have time to count them. The Second again showed weakness. He panicked, and since he was at one of the dormer windows, he gave an automatic burst into the forest twilight. Something darted between the trees, and the Second began to shoot. Hardly managed to stop him. They pulled the horn and removed the Second from guard. They sent him to the center of the attic, and in pairs took positions at the windows. The ladder was pulled inside. Suddenly, the top of the nearest tree fell into our dormer window. She scratched the wall, tore down the frame's board, cracked it, and stepped inside. A similar noise came from the opposite window.
"They are crawling,"
they shouted there, and opened fire. We also saw how deft the creatures were as they climbed along the trunk to the window. Now, a terrible fanged face appeared in front of me. I shot. Following the fallen cannibal was the Second. The attack of shaggy bison in our window ended only after my partner and I killed 5. The guys at the other window were scared too.
"You've never seen this before,"
they said, trying to push the trunk of a tree thrown inwards into the attic. Unknown creatures, and they acted harmoniously. We shot down 3.
"Shoot single,"
I advised.
"I think they will climb again."
I was wrong. The creatures abandoned the assault, but howled in hoarse voices. Pushed into the windows of the trees, we managed to push out and throw. Barely dawn, we climbed down from our shelter. I went first. Before I could get to the ground, a short line burst out of the window, and a wounded creature screamed next to me. For the first time, I saw it in the light. It moved on its hind legs, occasionally on its front, which was rather hands. I threw the machine up and slapped him in the back. The creature fell on its face, and then a hoarse howl came from the bushes. I shot by ear. Useless. Very quickly, they learned to hide behind the trunks or snuggle close to the ground. Terribly smart. They were no corpses of those who we shot last night. Later, it turned out that they had ate them. After a couple of seconds, the whole group managed to get downstairs. We took the dead creature to get a good look at it. It was a cross between a man and a wolf. Shaggy, toothy, big-headed. It was something creepy, with pointy ears over a clever muzzle. But we made a mistake. While considering the creature dead, detracted, immediately and paid. Monsters jumped simultaneously from all sides. Their actions were as coordinated as if all 11 were one organism. If we had noticed them earlier, the operation would have been completed successfully, but the second died first. Shaggy Beast grabbed him from behind and dug into his neck. 3 creatures attacked my former partner at the same time. He shot the first one, but the other one threw him to the ground and immediately finished him off. 2 other fighters managed to make several short bursts and took 4 of them out to the other world. All this happened in the blink of an eye, but my brain clearly fixed the course of the battle. With single shots, I managed to annul 2. The third one grabbed his teeth into the left shoulder in that very moment when the bayonet fastened to the machine gun ripped his belly open. It's amazing how they were distributed in order to have more attackers for stronger opponents. Did they agree in advance? Smell guts? While I was finishing the monster, the 3 survivors switched to me. Kicking off the foot of the slain, I threw up the machine gun. Kalash jumped chaotically and ashamed, did not send bullets sighting. 2 creatures caught their own. The only beast that remained from the attackers clutched at the same wounded shoulder and knocked me down. I saw the gaze of his yellow, inhuman eyes in front of me. I smelled the foulness of the toothy maw and prepared to die. Suddenly, the beast recoiled and ran away. Not believing in salvation, I looked sideways. In the middle of the battlefield stood a hefty bear. Having met his eyes with mine, he said almost clearly,
"Wolf I do not like."
That was already very bad. I decided it was time for the deathbed hallucinations. But the bear, as I understood later, was just the 20th unit of objects destined for destruction. Apparently, he too was the fruit of genetic experiments. But unlike the rest of the creatures, he did not live in a cage. Probably he had a lot of freedom and could leave the taiga. Otherwise, why didn't he save the scientists when they were crushed and nibbled by wolfmen?
Wicked,
the bear repeated, dragging me into the middle of the helipad. And then, barely hearing the distant chirp of the engine, turned and went back into the taiga. Shortly after, servicemen flew in. They picked up the bodies of my comrades, calculated the corpses of the dead animals, and took me away. When the noise around Dolly the Lamb broke out the press, it is my understanding the circumstances of that long-time expedition grew together. Obviously not only in aviation, space, and the nuclear industries, but also in genetics. We were far ahead of the European world, but it was all classified as secret. Even our limited group should not have known what the scientists were involved in, or what terrifying results they were able to achieve. Brilliant foresight consisted in warning about the futility of such attempts, but did people really care about predictions? I had to cross with similar experiments, and who knows if similar experiments are being conducted now. To pry the misfortunes of pseudo-geneticists always is like those who are ready to work for the good of the motherland. keeping their mouths shut. I kept him there, despite the fact that the country was falling apart. Even the archives have long disappeared into a landfill. In addition to internal discipline, the feeling of gratitude to the bear also made me silent. After all, but he saved my life, even though he himself was a victim of genetic experiment.